This BizNews production is brought to you by Brenthurst Wealth, a multi-award-winning, truly independent boutique wealth manager. Invest better with Brenthurst.
So, first of all, thank you. Just on a lighter note, when Alex spoke about the lantern jaw, about a year or two ago, there have been quite a few funny pictures drawn about my jaw. It's something that you can't really miss. And the one evening I'm on Twitter and I'm scrolling through, and there's a comment by someone saying, "Is this guy keeping a Galaxy 10 tablet in his mouth?" And I immediately send it to my dad because he's got the same problem or advantage. I don't know. It depends how you look at it. And my grandfather too. So the jaw certainly has it's made an impression. So I didn't ask Alec for group counseling after the discussion. There are hopeful things, but I also have to be honest, and I'm going to try and make sure that we stick within the time. I want to start off without the negativity first and tell you in no uncertain terms that we have incredible people that still work in the South African Police Service. And I say that unashamedly and very, very proudly of a lot of very close family friends of mine that do spectacular work despite the circumstances. And I want to start the speech by acknowledging them. So I just thank you. I think we need to understand the circumstances first, and then I'm going to go through what some of the current serious challenges are and how I believe and why we need to push back on them. These cops work in extremely dilapidated circumstances. Not too long ago, I did an unannounced oversight visit to public order policing at Fora Base in Cape Town. And 70% of their vehicles were not operational. And we had to literally launch an entire, just a short-term intervention to get them back to an 80% strength again. And it worked, but the point is, it shouldn't have gone that far. They often have to work alongside colleagues they don't trust. Solidarity at one stage did a survey among SAPS members in the Western Cape where it determined that around 50% of police members don't trust their colleagues. And they are then expected to confront sophisticated criminal networks despite not necessarily having the systems that those very criminal networks have access to. So I don't think we lack good people that are able to police. And I'm not speaking just within the South African Police Service. I'm talking about just South Africans that are solid in knowing how to tackle the crime crisis in the country. The issue is that the entire institution, and when I say that, I mean SAPS, the Hawks, the MPA, the entire security cluster has over time been hollowed out. And I want to just pause for a second on that hollowing out, because for so long, I've heard people say, but they're just incompetent. That's an old excuse. I'm telling you today that the majority of the hollowing out was absolutely intentional. It was absolutely deliberate, because the ANC and the criminal cartels linked to them cannot function the way that they need to function in order to loot state coffers if they do not control the police. So they have to hollow it out. They have to make sure that it doesn't function, because otherwise they wouldn't have money to steal. Over the years, we've noted political interference, and previously actually with Alec at BizNews, we spoke about the different commissioners from over the years. So I'm not going to go through all of them again. But we need to understand that when these institutions are weakened, it literally opens state coffers for further looting. Billions of rands have been siphoned out. We've heard this over the last 2 or 3 days. And had the police service remained strong and not deliberately crippled, I honestly believe we would be in a far, far better situation than what we are right now. It's also interesting to see that the consequences of political appointments past aren't remembered very much by the very people who made those appointments. And it's a friendly reminder, again, to the ANC. If we think back at, for example, Jackie Selebi, may he not rest in peace, as I always say, he was one of the people who, in my opinion, started digging the grave for the South African Police Service. He disbanded specialized units. He was involved in disbanding the commandos. And even though, in my opinion, personal opinion, the commandos weren't the magic answer to fix things, it gave some sort of state efficiency, capacity, some kind of a statutory capacity within rural communities especially. And why wouldn't they have just pushed that over and built out the reservist system even more? Selebi later on, and as we know, maybe I should say this, was also a member of the ANC's NEC while he was the National Commissioner of the South African Police Service. We think of Ria Piecha. This is a very interesting one. Ria gave herself a 10-year service medal after just a year of service. Ria gave herself the amalgamation medal after not having done anything amalgamating in her entire career. Ria also gave herself the Soccer World Cup medal after not touching anything regarding the Soccer World Cup. We think of the current head of supply chain management in the South African Police Service, who basically opened the door for Kat Matlala to loot millions upon millions of rands from the South African Police Service, who himself was previously accused and being investigated by the SIU for being involved in massive PPE fraud during COVID-19 when he was working at Treasury. Never mind the South African Police Service, he was still appointed as the head of supply chain. So once this leadership is compromised, it becomes very, very difficult to ensure that it doesn't siphon through to the bottom. But I want to tell you one good example of how it can be done. The Border Management Authority is slowly becoming probably the cleanest, even though it's one of the smallest, but one of the cleanest law enforcement authorities in the country. Just in the past week, they've charged and dismissed over 50 of their own Border Management Authority members under the leadership of Leon Schreiber as the Minister of Home Affairs, once again for corruption. Those are just the latest 50. It doesn't include all the others that have been dismissed and charged before. Leon tells me the other day that some of the syndicates that have been operating, that they've started closing down inside Home Affairs, have been operating for over 2 decades. That gives you an idea of how well settled, how institutionalized some of this corruption and organized crime has become. I therefore tell you that the problems that we face have got nothing to do with incompetence. Incompetence is a secondary issue. It's got nothing to do with police making haphazard mistakes, etc. There are 2 specific things. The one is a total lack in political will, and the second one is a totally broken integrity management system. Integrity management has gone totally, in my opinion, missing. Some would say rogue in the South African Police Service, because many of those that have been accused, people that have been indicated being involved in significant corruption over the last few months with the Madlanga Commission, as well as the ad hoc committee in Parliament, are people that have supposedly been vetted. But we all know now that that process clearly didn't function properly. If we look at research by the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, it's very interesting to see that every year we perform slightly better when it comes to organized crime. We are now one of the highest ranking organized crime capitals in the world, never mind in the top 3 in Africa. We have become a hub for human trafficking, drug trafficking. Right here, unfortunately, Alex, sorry to burst your bubble, but in Hermanus is one of the capitals of abalone poaching, where narcotics is often one of the things that is traded for abalone by the very poachers that operate in this area. So for no moment should we think that all of the enclaves don't have organized crime. You can see the group counseling loading. Organized crime simply cannot reach those levels without significant state involvement. It's that simple. When the state becomes part of a cartel or parts of the state become cartels, then it becomes very, very easy for organized crime to flourish the way that it does. So when they say we've appointed another task team to tackle this issue, but it's the same leader that's already been in place of, for example, the MPA or IDAC or South African Police Service, whatever the institution might be, it cannot be that we want to have a different result with the same integrityless leadership. I want to move to whistleblowers. Across South Africa, whistleblowers, we all know the name of Babita Deokaran as one of the probably most famous names of over the last few years. Even some investigators, some of the metro investigators in Johannesburg, as well as in Pretoria, or people who have either been attempted to be assassinated or unfortunately have been assassinated. Ekurhuleni too. Community activists, one of the people, I see my old colleague Tian Estra is in here, and when we worked at Action Society in Gugulethu specifically, where the incident happened, Auntie Goofy was one of the people that was assassinated because she was speaking up against extortion and speaking up against corruption in the South African police service. I want to give you an example of how quickly this gets entrenched and why it's important for us, and I'll get to the solutions now, to speak up against it. This week, the city of Cape Town called on PRASA to investigate the allegations that gang-linked companies became embedded in the reconstruction of the Central Line Railway project. You would have seen the articles regarding Ralph Stanfield's involvement, etc. I see this morning Amabungani started releasing videos where Ralph himself intimidated subcontractors that were trying to do work as they were originally appointed there. Violence continued to disrupt the reconstruction. The security problems escalated, and eventually they ended up appointing those very companies who were causing the problems. And miraculously, the problems supposedly then stopped. When institutions like the South African Police Service or the DPCI weaken like this, the vacuum keeps opening. And you'd notice that the more the increase of pressure on these institutions becomes to tackle the issues, you'd notice how frantically the media smear campaigns against those trying to stop it become. You'll notice that they often move to even more extreme statements in the media to try and taint those that are actually pushing back against the corruption. There are two specific things that I want to touch on that I can't emphasize enough. One of the themes that I've come across during this conference, and I think there's some politicians that wouldn't be too impressed with me for saying so, but I want to start by telling you that the state must never, ever have the monopoly on your safety. Never. You can never trust the state to be the sole proprietor of your security. That's point number one. The second one, you have to support civil society organizations, whether it's neighborhood watches, community policing forums, farm watches, private security companies even. I'm not talking financially. I'm talking of getting involved somehow. Help them to cover a specific community operation, CCTV cameras with the community, partnerships with community structures. These institutions have not tried to, contrary to popular belief by let's say Iran and Venezuela thinking people, tried to overthrow the state. They've simply filled the gap because the state cannot do their jobs properly, or they choose not to do their jobs properly. Which brings me to the most significant debate that's very, very close to my heart. And that is, should law-abiding citizens be disarmed in a country where the state itself struggles to guarantee your safety? Some argue that the solution to violence is simply to tax more those that own firearms. I kid you not. Just about 2 weeks ago, there was an article in Daily Maverick by Claire Taylor and someone else who wrote that they should introduce sin tax on people who own lawful firearms. It sounds decisive. It kind of sounds like finally someone brought some fresh solution. But it basically means that those that are actually following the law is being punished to do so, and those that are involved in arms trafficking and everything else we see happening around us can just continue to do what they need to do. Treating them as the same policy problem as, for example, some would argue alcohol or cigarettes is a massive category error. It simply is not practical. And we should ask the question, why do they really want to disarm people? What is the real reason? Because there's no scientifically or research-backed indication from anyone up until this point that lawfully armed citizens are the reason for the increase in violent crime. It hasn't been done. Even state research, I think it was 2013 or 2014, the state, specifically the Civilian Secretariat of Police, along with the Wits School of Governance, released a study that indicated that lawfully armed citizens are not the reason for the increase in gun-related criminal offences. So them running this narrative is purely false. Despite all the pushback, despite all the campaigns to make sure that this doesn't happen, they continue trying to introduce this. And I'm sorry to say, but the day that they disarm a law-abiding populace, we've got far bigger problems than what we realize. Many of these other things are issues, but that day is the day that they would allow tyranny to happen and for good people in the country to suffer the consequences of them trying to constantly centralize power and then obviously hurt those that they are meant to serve. In one reporting period over the last year or so, I did a parliamentary question to ask about the loss of firearms, and it indicated that the South African Police Service alone had lost 741 SAPS firearms just in that very short time period. I think that was one financial year. When the state struggles to safeguard its own armories, taxing licensed citizens will obviously not lead to any reform. They're simply deflecting. It's so easy to blame the citizens, and a lot of us, unfortunately, have become so kind of timid or apathetic that we don't want to cause trouble or push back, that we rather just take the beating and hope that they don't actually disarm us. There's also a contradiction in their approach. When gangsterism spirals out of control, and this is the latest example with Acting Minister Kachalia, where he says the city of Cape Town shouldn't build a wall to try and better coordinate their reaction to crime, but at the same time, he doesn't bring a solution. He needs to call in the army to come and fix the mess that the police have made in some of those areas. He also won't allow for the expansion of policing powers, giving forensic capacity to, for example, the Metro Police or any provincial authority for that matter. Again, similar to firearms, we should ask, what is the real reason? Is it because of politics or is it because of the people? Because if it were for the people, they would be welcoming any solution that we could find to combat some of this violence. If we're serious about rebuilding the crime-fighting capacity, integrity testing, in my opinion, is number one. And we have to start at the top. I think we can start on different levels probably, but if we don't fix the rot at the top, we can't expect it to change on ground level. We must rebuild crime intelligence. We must secure state armories. We must target the firearm trafficking networks and improve conviction rates. Now, people announce all these arrests being made, but they can't indicate to us what the conviction rates are. But more importantly, something you might say, but how do we influence that? Well, you can't all influence that, but you can get involved on a local level. You can assist your neighborhood watch and your farm watch. And if you don't, it becomes very difficult to then change the trajectory that we see on ground level. During this space, it's very difficult to keep your wits about you sometime. And years ago, you'd remember the former Army General Roland de Vries gave me a poem by Rudyard Kipling called F. And a specific quote in there that stuck to me that says, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs. And it's critical for us in this room that we need to keep our wits about us and keep cool, calm heads and focus on what we can do, where we can make an impact. Control the storm that you can actually have an influence on. The second one also that he introduced me to was Thomas Sowell, that said, the most basic question is not what is the best, but who shall decide what is the best. So if you keep allowing other people to decide what is best, obviously you're not going to get the choice that you wanted in the first place. We need to be far more vocal. We need to step forward. We cannot retreat on any of this. If there's some kind of a protest action, I 120% agree with Rob that the private sector needs to step up. More of these business owners need to step forward. They need to say, but if 10 businesses step forward, they can't arrest all of us, can they? They can maybe pick on one. But if you've got that amount of businesses actually stepping forward and speaking out, it becomes very difficult to resist. So first, get involved locally. Second, use that to strengthen your community. I always say that it's like a lawfully armed citizen. It's good that you can defend yourself, and after that, obviously, your family. Hopefully, you like them to defend them first. And then after that, you need to be able to defend the people that live next to you, your neighbors. And when neighbors start defending each other, then you're starting to defend an entire community. That's the mindset that we need to have. The third step is to step into public life. Be a part of the debate. You sometimes, social media is not necessarily the only answer. You get crucified, annihilated sometimes by people, bots, trolls, etc. on social media. But that is not necessarily the majority of public perception. We need to grow thicker skins, and we need to make sure that we say, that we speak up, we get out there, and we step forward. I know I'm almost done, I'm closing. We need to stop complaining about professional politicians. Now, people might say, geez, that's lucky, you are one now. I still don't see myself as one sometimes. But we need professionals to become politicians. So it's very important this, because we've got a lot of people who have simply made a life out of being jacks of all trade, and they are professional politicians. But we need professional people that are willing to step forward, whether it's in politics, whether it's in civil society, but we need those expertise to come forward and say, but I'm willing to, sacrifice the next few years to tackle a specific issue. I can tell you now that if capable citizens don't get involved in politics, civil society, politics will always be filled by those who should never have been there in the first place. I can guarantee you. There's no use in us complaining about the shallow level of quality that we sometimes see in the political space, but ourselves aren't willing to step forward and do something about it. We will not be saved by silence. It will be saved by citizens who simply refuse to surrender their country to criminals. And I'm telling you now that what we've heard over the last few months, unfortunately, parts of the country has already been surrendered to criminals. And we need to make sure that that doesn't go any further. We need to make sure that we're all citizens that stand up, that speak out, and that refuse to back down. I can tell you today as I close that I honestly do have hope, and I have hope because of the people that came and spoke here the last few days. When I listen to them in the innovative way in which they speak, and they refuse to leave because they say, but I've got just as much right as anyone else to be here. I feel hopeful because none of us are alone in the arena. So I want to challenge you today and encourage you to be in that arena, face the music. It is difficult. It's not an easy space to be in. And everyone doesn't necessarily need to go and patrol in the most dangerous area you can. But every single one of us can play a specific role to make an impact, whether on a local, regional, provincial, or a national level. Thank you.
This BizNews production is brought to you by Brenthurst Wealth, a multi-award-winning, truly independent boutique wealth manager. Invest better with Brenthurst.